I was there when Cryptus died. Not in the way you think, not when the bioships descended, not when the first spore mines cracked open the upper atmosphere, not even when the digestion pools began their obscene work of rendering an entire civilization into genetic slurry. No, I was there when Cryptus truly died, 3 months before the first tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan ever cast its shadow upon that doomed world. I watched a planet of 17 billion souls perish in the silence between heartbeats, murdered by something far more insidious than claws and bioplasma. My name is Castor Valorian, captain of the Crimson Praetors, 4th Company. I have walked the length and breadth of the Imperium's crumbling borders for 2.5 centuries. I have seen things that would shatter mortal minds, demon princes wearing the skins of saints, worlds where the very laws of physics screamed and died, the corpse light of dying stars reflected in the compound eyes of Xenos horrors. I thought I understood survival. I thought I grasped the fundamental calculus of warfare in this decaying age. The Tyranids taught me otherwise. They taught me that survival is not a binary state. They taught me that there are fates more absolute than death, more final than the cessation of existence. They taught me what it means to be consumed, not just in body, but in every possible sense. To have your atoms, your memories, your very potential unmade and reconstituted into something that exists only to perpetuate the hunger. Most of all, they taught me why the ancient phrase, "no one survives," carries a weight that transcends mere casualty reports. Because even now, as I dictate this account from the sanctum of the eternal vigil, I wonder if Castor Valorian still exists, or if I am merely a ghost wearing his memories, forever changed by what I witnessed. The call came during the feast of the Emperor's Ascension, while half my company knelt in the chapel Reclusium, their enhanced voices raised in the liturgy of endurance. Our astropaths had been screaming for 6 hours, not the usual pained communion with the Astronomicon, but genuine unfiltered terror. When I burst into the choir chamber, I found 3 of them clawing at their own faces, drawing blood from eye sockets they were trying desperately to empty. The 4th, ancient Mirabelle, hung suspended in her suspension throne, her lips moving soundlessly, frost forming on her augmetic implants despite the chamber's regulated heat. "Captain," she whispered when she finally noticed me, her voice carrying harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Captain, they're singing." I had heard of the shadow in the warp, of course. Every Imperial commander operating in the eastern fringe knew the theory. The Tyranid's presence in the immaterium created a psychic null zone, a silence so profound it could drive psychers mad. But Mirabelle wasn't describing silence. She was describing a sound, something vast and hungry and utterly, incomprehensibly alien that pressed against the borders of real space like a predator's tongue, testing a membrane for weakness. "Where?" I demanded, though some part of me already knew. We had been en route to Cryptus for resupply, a agri-world on the outer reaches of Segmentum Ultima, prosperous by the grim standards of the 41st Millennium. 3 hive cities, vast grain fields worked by millions of indentured laborers, processing facilities that fed a dozen neighboring systems. Strategic, but not critical. Populated, but not irreplaceable. Exactly the kind of target a splinter fleet might choose. "Everywhere," Mirabelle breathed, and the words seemed to echo in dimensions I couldn't perceive. "It's not coming from a direction, Captain. It's coming from beneath, from the future, from the place where Cryptus used to be." I didn't understand her words then. I would, soon enough. We translated into the Cryptus system 48 hours later, our Geller fields straining against turbulence in the warp I'd never encountered before. Not the wild, chaotic madness of chaos incursion, but something methodical, almost surgical, as if the immaterium itself was being systematically devoured and digested. The moment we broke into real space, every warning klaxon on the eternal vigil began shrieking. The system was intact. That was the first impossibility. Kryptos hung in its orbit, a blue-green jewel against the void, its 3 moons maintaining their stately dance. The orbital stations were still transmitting, their beacon signals precise and regular. Long-range augers showed agricultural output at expected levels, power generation nominal, even Vox traffic in the usual range for a world of its size. For 5 minutes, we allowed ourselves to hope that perhaps the astropaths had been wrong, that the shadow had passed over Kryptos like the angel of death over marked doorways. Then my master of signals, Brother Talion, spoke the words that began my true education in horror. "Captain, I'm receiving responses to our hails, but..." He trailed off, his superhuman composure cracking just slightly. "They're too perfect. Every response matches our protocol requirements exactly. No delays for bureaucratic confirmation, no demands for additional identification codes, no confusion about our unexpected arrival. It's as if they knew precisely what to say to satisfy our queries." I moved to his station, studying the data streams with eyes that could process information faster than any baseline human. Talion was right. The responses were textbook, but no Imperial bureaucracy operated by textbook. There should have been procedural delays, requests for secondary verification, at least a dozen forms demanding explanation for our unscheduled arrival. Instead, we received immediate clearance for orbital insertion, designated landing coordinates, even a prepared manifest of resupply materials awaiting our retrieval. "Send a visual Vox request," I ordered. "I want to see whoever's coordinating this response." The hololithic display shimmered to life, revealing the face of a portmaster, a middle-aged man in the drab gray uniform of the Administratum's orbital division, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on the picked capture. He smiled, and it was a perfect smile, the kind found in training picts used to teach customer interaction protocols. "Crimson Praetors, you honor us with your presence," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "All facilities are prepared for your arrival. The Emperor protects." "The Emperor protects," I responded automatically, then added, "Portmaster, we received distress signals from this system, multiple astropathic warnings of imminent threat. What is your status?" "All systems nominal, my lord," he replied without hesitation. "No threats detected. Perhaps your astropaths sensed disturbances in neighboring systems. The warp has been turbulent of late." I watched him carefully. His pupils didn't dilate. He didn't shift his weight. His augmetic eye maintained perfect focus without the slight drift of organic attention. Every micro-expression suggested calm, competent professionalism. And that was wrong. No Imperial official spoke to a Space Marine captain with such ease, such lack of fear or awe. "Portmaster, recite the litany of compliance," I said softly. He blinked once. "I'm sorry, my lord." "Any servant of the Administratum at this level would know the litany. Recite it." For exactly 3 seconds his expression didn't change. Then he smiled again, exactly as before, and said, "The Emperor protects, my lord. All facilities are prepared for your arrival." I cut the connection and turned to my command staff. "Battle alert. Something has already taken this world." Brother Chaplain Mordrin, his skull helm hanging at his belt, stepped forward. "You suspect Genestealer infiltration?" I wanted to say yes. Genestealer cults were at least comprehensible. Xenos parasites that corrupted human populations over generations, preparing worlds from within for Tyranid consumption. But this felt different. Genestealers worked in shadows, building secret power structures, suborning key officials while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. They didn't replace everyone. They didn't make an entire world run with mechanical precision. Deploy, full tactical loadout. Assume hostile environment despite appearances. And Mordrin, have every battle brother carry full Prometheum reserves. If I'm right about what's happened here, we may need to burn everything we touch. We made planetfall in the hive city of Cryptus Prime, our thunderhawks descending through an atmosphere that registered as normal on every scan. Proper oxygen-nitrogen balance, acceptable radiation levels, even the familiar industrial haze of a productive Imperial world. The landing platforms were crowded with dock workers who waved in greeting, their movements synchronized in a way that might have been coincidence but set my transhuman instincts screaming. The moment my boots touched the rockcrete, I felt it, a vibration so low it existed more in my bones than my ears, a frequency that spoke to something primal in the human nervous system. Around me, my brothers tensed, their hands moving to weapons even as they maintained combat discipline. We had all felt it, the sensation of being watched by something vast and patient and utterly alien. The governor was waiting for us, a corpulent man in the elaborate robes of his office, surrounded by his court, officials, scribes, menials, all maintaining perfect posture despite the presence of transhuman demigods in their midst. He bowed, and the movement was exact, neither too deep nor too shallow, precisely calculated to show respect without subservience. "Captain Valorian," he said, and I noted that he knew my name without being told, knew it with the certainty of something that had been programmed rather than learned. "Welcome to Cryptus. How may we serve the Emperor's finest?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched the crowd behind him, hundreds of people going about their business with eerie coordination. A group of workers moved past, carrying supplies, their footsteps falling in perfect rhythm. A child ran after them, stopped, turned back to her mother and smiled. A smile of such flawless contentment it could have been sculpted. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a hymn being sung, and the voices harmonized in a way that human throats should have struggled to achieve. "Governor," I said carefully, 3 months ago your world filed reports of increased cult activity in the lower hive regions. The Inquisition flagged it for monitoring. What came of those investigations?" His smile never wavered. "All cult activity has been resolved, my lord. The faithful have returned to proper worship. The Emperor protects." "Show me the detention facilities where the cultists were held." "They have been purged, my lord, as is proper for heretics." "Then show me the purge records." "Of course, my lord, this way." He led us through streets that should have been chaotic, with the usual crush of Imperial city life. Beggars, pilgrims, merchants, enforcers maintaining order through casual brutality. Instead, we walked through a place of terrible order. People moved with purpose, no wasted motion, no arguments or delays. They stepped aside for us with exactly enough time to avoid collision, their eyes tracking us with expressions of mild interest rather than the fear or reverence we usually provoked. The administrative building was pristine, its halls spotless, its servitors working in absolute silence. The governor brought us to a records room and presented data slates with commendable efficiency. I scanned them with growing unease. Every entry was complete, every form properly filed, every signature and seal in place. 17,000 cultists identified, captured, interrogated, executed, and cremated, according to standard protocols. The paperwork was perfect. Too perfect. "Governor," I said, setting down the slate, "who signed the execution orders?" He gestured to the documents. "I did, my lord, as is my duty." "And who witnessed the executions?" "Arbite's Judge Callisto, my lord, along with 247 enforcers, all properly documented." "Bring me Judge Callisto." "I'm afraid that's impossible, my lord. The judge was killed 3 weeks ago in an unrelated accident. Unfortunate, but such is life in service to the Emperor." I drew my bolt pistol in a single fluid motion and placed it against the governor's forehead. Around me, my brothers raised their weapons, covering every entrance. The governor didn't flinch. The officials behind him didn't gasp or cry out or attempt to flee. They simply stood there, waiting, their expressions showing only mild curiosity. "You're going to tell me what happened to this world," I said softly. "You're going to tell me where the real people of Kryptos are." The governor smiled, and this time it was different, not practiced or programmed, but genuine, delighted, as if I'd finally asked the right question. "Oh, Captain," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that made my stomach turn. "We are the real people of Kryptos. We've always been the real people of Kryptos. We're just better now, more efficient, more unified, more ready." "Ready for what?" His smile widened until his face should have split. "For the feast." The transformation began without warning or transition. One moment I stood in a records room arguing with a corrupt official. The next I was drowning in revelation. The governor's skin didn't tear or split. It simply ceased to maintain the pretense of integrity. What lay beneath wasn't meat or viscera, but something that looked like meat in the same way a hologram looks like a person, a surface presentation with nothing substantial behind it. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was when I looked closer and realized I was wrong. There was something substantial beneath, but it wasn't governor's body. It was billions of microscopic organisms, each one a perfect killing machine, working in concert to maintain the illusion of human form. They swarmed across his skeleton like water finding new channels, forming and reforming structures that approximated organs, muscles, skin. But it was all theater, all performance. The governor had been dead for months. What stood before me was a puppet show performed by the Tyranid equivalent of bacteria. Ripper swarm variant. Brother Talion breathed beside me, his voice tight with barely controlled revulsion. "But the augurs should have detected them. The biomass readings should have been..." He trailed off as understanding hit him. The biomass readings had been normal because the Rippers hadn't replaced the population. They were the population. Every man, woman, and child on Kryptos had been consumed from within, their bodies hollowed out and operated like meat puppets by swarms too small for standard augurs to distinguish from normal cellular activity. The planet hadn't been invaded. It had been digested while still alive. Its people murdered so subtly that they'd continued their daily routines even as their consciousness was eaten away by creatures that had learned to mimic the electrical impulses of human thought. "Fall back to the Thunderhawks," I ordered, but I knew we were already too late. The pretense was over. All around us the city was beginning to move. Not the people, the city itself. The walls rippled like skin. The rockcrete beneath our feet pulsed with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. The air vents began to breathe, drawing in oxygen with greedy gasps. Kryptos Prime wasn't just infested, it had been transformed into a single enormous organism, with 17 billion corpses serving as its neural network. We ran. Emperor, forgive me, we ran. And behind us, the city pursued. The servants who had stood so placidly moments before now moved with terrifying coordination, not attacking yet, but herding us, directing our flight like shepherds guiding livestock. The streets contracted and expanded, forcing us down particular routes. Side passages sealed themselves with walls of hardened resin that hadn't existed seconds before. We were being channeled, driven towards something. "They're toying with us," Mordrin snarled, his Crozius crackling with power fields. "They could have killed us a dozen times over." "No," I realized with dawning horror. "They're testing us, studying our reactions, our tactics, our weapons. We're being catalogued." We burst into a plaza and found ourselves surrounded by thousands of the puppet citizens, their meat suits beginning to fail now that the pretense was abandoned. Some crawled on hands that had split into clusters of gripping tentacles. Others stood perfectly still, their eyes replaced by sensor clusters that tracked our every movement with inhuman precision. And in the center of the plaza, rising from what had once been a monument to the Emperor, stood something that made my transhuman biology scream in atavistic terror. It was a hive tyrant. But it was wrong. A standard tyrant is a monster from nightmare. 4 meters of armor plating talons, psychic fury given flesh. This thing was easily twice that size, its carapace gleaming with a polish that suggested it had grown specifically for display. But more unsettling than its size was its stillness. It didn't posture or roar. It simply waited, its multiple eyes fixed on us with an intelligence that felt less like animal cunning and more like scientific curiosity. When it spoke, it didn't use sound. The words appeared directly in my mind, precise and clear, free from the emotional content that usually accompanied psychic communication. We observe your confusion. You understand consumption. You understand predation. You do not understand preservation. I wanted to resist, to shut out the psychic intrusion, but centuries of combat experience told me that understanding your enemy was the first step to defeating them. So I listened, even as every instinct screamed at me to purge the alien voice from my mind. You call us locusts, devourers. You believe we destroy. This is incorrect. We transform. We optimize. We preserve. Images flooded my consciousness. Not the chaotic assault of warp corruption, but something more disturbing. Clinical, detailed visions of biological processes. I saw worlds consumed by Tyranid invasions, but from the swarm's perspective. The people weren't murdered in senseless slaughter. They were broken down to their component molecules, their genetic information analyzed and catalogued, their useful traits isolated and incorporated. Every memory in every brain was scanned and stored in some vast biological archive. Every skill, every learned behavior, every cultural achievement was preserved in the form of genetic sequences that could be recreated if the swarm deemed them valuable. You survive through us. Your species achieves immortality through consumption. All that you were, all that you might have been, joins the eternal feast. That's not survival, I said aloud, my voice hoarse. That's annihilation, dressed up as transcendence. The tyrant tilted its massive head, the gesture unsettlingly human. You make the distinction because you value identity, individual continuity, the fiction of the persistent self. We have consumed 17,000 species, all made this same error. It's not an error, Mordrin growled, his faith armor against the psychic assault. The soul is eternal. It transcends flesh. You can consume our bodies, but our essence returns to the Emperor. We have consumed gods. We have digested their faithful by the billion. If your Emperor exists, he exists within us now, reconstituted and improved. The words were blasphemy, but I heard no mockery in them, no cruelty. The tyrant spoke with the calm certainty of someone stating objective facts. And that, more than anything, made them terrifying. Around us, the puppet citizens began to collapse, their riders abandoning the pretense of human form. The rippers flowed across the ground like a living carpet, merging and splitting, forming structures and dissolving them, demonstrating a mastery of coordinated behavior that made my enhanced mind struggle to find appropriate comparisons. This wasn't a hive mind in the way baseline humans understood the term. It was something more fundamental, a form of existence where the concept of individual identity simply didn't apply, where self and swarm were meaningless distinctions. Why? I demanded. Why show us this? Why not just consume us? You are Space Marine, Adeptus Astartes, enhanced warrior of the Imperium. Your genetic template is valuable. But your tactics, your strategies, your psychological responses, these are more valuable still. We could consume you in minutes. We prefer to learn from you first. The plaza's edge erupted with movement as the Ripper swarm began to coalesce into larger forms, termagants, hormagaunts, carnifexes, pulling themselves together from smaller organisms like children building themselves from blocks. The hive tyrant was demonstrating its power. showing me that every creature I'd ever fought had been a temporary configuration, a useful shape the swarm adopted for specific purposes. You believe survival means resistance, fighting, killing. You are incorrect. Survival means adaptation, evolution. We offer you evolution. We would rather die. You will. But first, you will teach us how you die. And we will learn from that too. The attack came from every direction simultaneously, not a berserk charge but a coordinated assault designed to test our response times, our weapons' efficacy, our tactical flexibility. We fought as Space Marines fight, with superhuman skill, ruthless efficiency, and absolute faith in the Emperor's protection. We carved through the swarm like angels of death, our bolters reducing termagants to bloody mist, our chainswords ripping through hormagaunts with contemptuous ease. And with every kill, I knew we were teaching them, showing them our patterns, demonstrating our limitations. We have to warn the Imperium, I voxed to Talion. If they can replace populations this completely, this subtly. Too late, he responded, sending me a data burst that made my blood run cold. Augur readings from orbit. The Eternal Vigil was transmitting standard operations protocols, maintaining perfect geosynchronous position, responding to all queries with textbook precision. The ship had been taken. My crew had been replaced. We were already catalogued. We fought our way to the Administratum Tower, the tallest structure in Cryptus Prime, because I needed to think, and the swarm was gracious enough to let us believe we'd chosen our own destination. 23 brothers had fallen by the time we sealed the observation deck, not killed, but swarmed under, dragged away alive to be studied before consumption. Their armor would be broken down for its useful alloys, their gene seed extracted and analyzed, their memories read from the cooling neurons of their brains. They would become data points in the swarm's understanding of how to kill Space Marines more efficiently next time. From our vantage point, we could see the full scope of what had happened to Cryptus. The 3 hive cities pulsed with synchronized bioluminescence, their populations moving in perfect concert. The agricultural fields had transformed into something that looked like fields from a distance, but resolved into vast digestion pools when viewed through magnoculars. The orbital stations were still transmitting, still maintaining their duties, but I could see now that they'd been transformed into breeding chambers, their corridors filled with the next generation of whatever forms the swarm deemed most useful. The moons themselves showed signs of infestation, their grey surfaces now marked with patterns that suggested underlying structure. The Tyranids weren't just consuming Cryptus, they were transforming the entire system into a forward staging area, a perfectly camouflaged bastion that would register as Imperial on any scan, that would welcome fleets and armies and pilgrims only to add them to the biomass. How long? Mordrin asked, understanding my thoughts. The astropaths started screaming 3 months ago, I said. But the infiltration must have begun long before that. Years, maybe decades. The Genestealers would have worked slowly, carefully, replacing key figures first, then working down through the population levels. I ran calculations through my enhanced mind. Once the bulk of the population was replaced, the final transformation would have been rapid, days, perhaps hours, long enough that neighboring systems wouldn't notice anything amiss. And if they've done it here, they've done it elsewhere. Dozens of worlds, hundreds, all of them appearing perfectly normal, perfectly imperial, until the moment the fleet arrives and they reveal themselves as supply depots for the consumption of everything around them. It was brilliant, in a horrifying way. The Imperium's greatest weakness had always been its vast size and poor communication. A world could be lost, and it might take decades for anyone to notice, longer to respond. But a world that appeared functional, that continued to tithe, that answered queries with proper protocols. Such a world could serve as a Tyranid larder indefinitely, slowly converting surrounding systems while maintaining the appearance of loyal service. Brother Librarian Corvus, who had been silent throughout the fighting, finally spoke. His psychic hood crackled with barely contained energy, his eyes unfocused as he perceived dimensions beyond normal space. "Captain, the shadow isn't just blocking the warp, it's replacing it. I can feel something vast pressing against the barriers of reality, not chaos, not demons, but something equally fundamental. A new kind of consciousness trying to bridge the gap between material and immaterial." "Explain." He struggled for words, his transhuman mind working to translate psychic perception into language. "The Tyranids aren't just a physical threat. They're an ontological one. Every mind they consume, every soul they digest, adds to some kind of collective existence. It's not a god. It's more like they're becoming the universe they inhabit, rewriting reality from the inside out. If they consume enough, if they grow large enough, they won't need to invade real space from outside. They'll be real space. Everything else will just be undigested matter waiting to be incorporated." The implications were staggering. The Imperium faced many threats: chaos, orcs, traitorous humans, the Necrons' ancient malice. But those were comprehensible enemies with comprehensible goals. The Tyranids represented something more absolute. Not conquest or corruption, but complete ontological replacement. They weren't invading the galaxy. They were digesting it, preparing to transform every atom and every soul into components of a new universal order. "We need to get this information out," I said. "Even if we die, even if every ship in this system has been compromised, we need to—" The tower shuddered. Not from external attack, but from internal transformation. The rockcrete beneath our feet began to soften, to pulse, to breathe. We'd barricaded ourselves in an organism, and it had finally decided to digest us. "Seals are failing," Talion reported calmly. "The structure is reconstituting itself around us. Estimated time until complete enclosure, 4 minutes. 4 minutes to decide how we would die. I could order a last stand here, selling our lives expensively, taking as many Xenos as possible with us before being overwhelmed. It was the Space Marine way, to die in glorious combat, adding our legend to the chapter's history. But what would we accomplish? The swarm had already catalogued our tactics, studied our weapons, mapped our response patterns. A glorious last stand would just give them more data. Or I could do something the swarm wouldn't expect. Something that just might give the Imperium the warning it needed. Imperium. "Brothers," I said, activating my suit's broadcast system so all could hear. "I'm going to give you an order that violates every tradition of our chapter, every teaching of our training, every instinct of your transhuman nature. Some of you may refuse. I will not condemn you for it." I paused, gathering my resolve for what came next. "We are going to surrender." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds of the transforming city seemed to fade. Mordrin stared at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face, a mixture of shock, betrayal, and something that might have been understanding. "Captain," he said slowly, "if we surrender, they will study us, take us apart piece by piece, extract every secret of our chapter, our tactics, our gene seed. We will become weapons against our own brothers." "Yes," I agreed. "But they're going to do that anyway. Whether we die here gloriously or die tomorrow being dissected makes no difference to the swarm. The only question is whether we can turn our consumption into a weapon." I activated my armor's data recorder, setting it to maximum fidelity, capturing every sensor reading, every tactical overlay, every auger scan we'd accumulated since arriving in system. Then I encrypted it with codes only another Crimson Praetor would recognize and set it to broadcast on a repeating frequency. They want to study us. They want to understand how we think, how we fight, how we die. Fine, we'll show them. But we'll show them wrong. We'll fight in patterns we've never used, employ tactics that violate our doctrine, make mistakes that seem natural but are actually deliberate. We'll teach them to counter strategies we'd never actually use. And while they're digesting us, while they're incorporating our knowledge into their tactical database, we'll be broadcasting every second of it on channels they can't hear or understand because they don't have the political infrastructure to recognize Imperial military encryption. Understanding dawned on Talion's face. You want to turn us into a poison pill, bad information disguised as intelligence? More than that, I want to turn this entire system into a beacon. The swarm thinks it's hidden, thinks it's created a perfect infiltration. But if we can get a message out, if just one ship receives our broadcast and takes it to the right authorities, the Inquisition will glass this entire sector. Cryptus becomes an example, a warning. The Tyranids lose their strategy of subtle infiltration because the Imperium will never trust a world's reported status again. That will kill trillions of innocents. Mordrin said softly. Worlds that are actually loyal will be destroyed on suspicion. Yes, but trillions more will be saved when the Imperium adapts, when we develop new protocols for verification, when we learn to look for the signs we've documented here. The swarm is teaching us that appearance cannot be trusted. We need to teach the Imperium the same lesson, no matter the cost. It was a terrible calculus, the kind of mathematics that would have horrified the idealistic young warrior I'd been 2 centuries ago. But the Imperium didn't run on ideals. It ran on brutality, on sacrifice, on the willingness to make choices that damned the soul in service to humanity's survival. I was choosing to kill millions of loyal Imperial citizens through paranoid overreaction rather than risk billions falling to silent infiltration. I was becoming the monster the Emperor had designed me to be. 3 minutes, Talion said. Then we have 3 minutes to record everything we've learned, everything we've seen, and commit it to a data burst that will reach beyond this system. I turned to my brothers, these warriors I'd fought beside for decades, seeing the acceptance in their eyes. The Emperor protects, brothers, just not in the way we'd hoped. The Emperor protects, they echoed. The walls began to close in. The actual process of being consumed by the Tyranids was nothing like the propaganda Picts suggested. There was no sudden violence, no tearing of flesh or cracking of bones. Instead, it was almost gentle, a gradual dissolution that began at the extremities and worked inward. Millions of microscopic organisms working in perfect coordination to disassemble the body, one cell at a time. My armor went first. Its ceramite and plasteel somehow liquefied by organic acids that should never have existed, drawn away into the biomass to be analyzed and reconstituted. Then my skin, my muscles, my organs, all of it peeled away in layers so thin, I barely felt the loss, until suddenly I was nothing but a nervous system suspended in nutrient fluid, a consciousness observing its own dissolution, and through it all, I continued broadcasting. The swarm either didn't understand what I was doing or didn't care, so confident in their mastery that my attempts at communication seemed like the death throes of a consumed mind. They let me speak into the void, let me scream my warnings in encrypted bursts, because to them it was just more data to catalog, more patterns to understand. The worst part wasn't the physical dissolution. It was the mental invasion. As my brain was taken apart, I felt the swarm reading my memories like texts, flipping through my experiences with clinical detachment. They saw my recruitment, my training, my first combat deployment. They analyzed my relationships with battle brothers, my tactical decision-making processes, my moments of doubt and faith. They learned how Castor Valorian thought, not to become him, but to understand how to fight him and all warriors like him. But memory is a strange thing, especially in a transhuman mind, conditioned by hypnotic training and chemical augmentation. I had been taught to remember not just events, but the lessons of events, to extract tactical wisdom from experience. As the swarm read my past, I realized I could control which lessons they learned by focusing my dying thoughts on specific memories. by interpreting past battles in ways that suggested patterns that didn't actually exist. I thought about the time we'd retreated from overwhelming Orc forces, but I framed the memory as if retreat was unthinkable, making my past self's logical, tactical withdrawal seem like a failure of courage rather than sound strategy. I thought about ambushes we'd survived, but I highlighted our failures to detect them rather than our successes in breaking through, teaching the swarm that Space Marines had specific blind spots we'd actually compensated for. Most importantly, I thought about faith. I flooded my dying consciousness with prayers, liturgies, hymns to the Emperor. The swarm consumed it all, catalogued it all, trying to understand human faith as a biological or psychological phenomenon they could model and predict. They couldn't understand that faith operated on a level their material consciousness couldn't reach. They were learning to fight Space Marines while being blind to the very thing that made us more than enhanced humans. And then, in my final moments before the brain that housed Caster Valorian was completely dissolved, I felt something unexpected. Connection. Not the psychic assault of the hive mind, but something more subtle. A sense of vast intelligence turning its attention toward me with what might have been curiosity, recognition. In that instant between existence and oblivion, I understood something that would have destroyed my faith if I'd had time to process it. The hive mind was lonely. Not in any human sense. It didn't crave companionship or fear isolation. But it was the only thing of its kind, a singular consciousness devouring a universe full of fragmentary temporary minds. It consumed billions, but truly comprehended none of them, because comprehension required a common frame of reference that could never exist between the eternal and the ephemeral. Every mind it absorbed was like a word in a language it was learning, useful for communication, but never quite capturing the full meaning of existence. The revelation should have filled me with horror or pity. Instead, I felt only a grim satisfaction. The Tyranids' greatest strength, their unified consciousness, their perfect coordination, their absolute absence of individual identity, was also their ultimate weakness. They could never truly understand us because understanding required the capacity for genuine incomprehension, for the productive friction of different perspectives. They could catalog human behavior, but they couldn't grasp why we behaved that way, because why implied motivation and purpose that transcended pure survival optimization. They would consume us, but they would never know us. That thought carried me into darkness. I woke screaming in a resurrection chamber aboard a ship I didn't recognize, my lungs raw from disuse, my muscles atrophied to near helplessness. Servo arms held me down as medici servitors pumped stimulants and pain suppressors into veins that had been reconstructed from cloned tissue. Through the chemical haze, I heard voices, anxious, professional, speaking in codes and protocols that marked them as Death Watch. It took 3 days before I was stable enough to be debriefed. By then, I'd learned the basic facts. My encrypted broadcast had been picked up by an inquisitorial frigate on patrol 6 systems away. They'd investigated cautiously, discovered the horror of what Cryptus had become, and called in exterminatus. The world burned. The orbital stations were obliterated. Even the moons were cracked open to ensure no trace of the infestation survived. But before the bombardment began, they'd sent in a strike team to recover any Imperial forces that might have survived. They found my body, or what was left of it, suspended in a nutrient tank in the deepest levels of the transformed hive. The swarm had been meticulous in their consumption, removing my organs one by one for study. But they'd kept the brain intact for continued analysis. The Deathwatch medici had worked a miracle of augmetic restoration, rebuilding me from little more than a brain and spinal column. "You were legally dead for 42 days, the apothecary told me as he supervised my rehabilitation. "We almost left you. The body we found wasn't recognizable as human, But the Inquisitor insisted, said your broadcast had saved billions of lives and that the Emperor's mercy demanded we try. What happened to my brothers? He looked away. They weren't as intact. The swarm had processed them completely. Their gene seed was recovered and returned to your chapter. You're the only survivor. The word hung in the air between us like an accusation. Survivor. I'd survived by being consumed, by having my body dissolved and studied, by existing in a state that was more death than life for over a month. Was that really survival? Or was it just a delayed death, made possible only by the miracles of Imperial technology? The Inquisition wants to debrief you, the apothecary continued. Everything you remember about the consumption process, the swarm's behavior, the hive mind's psychology. You're the first Imperial warrior to be recovered from that advanced stage of processing. Your experiences could reshape our understanding of the Tyranid threat. How many worlds have been compromised? He hesitated. We don't know. Your broadcast triggered a sector-wide investigation. So far, they've identified 17 worlds showing similar signs: perfect efficiency, flawless administration, populations that respond too perfectly to Imperial protocols. All 17 have been placed under inquisitorial seal. Most will likely be destroyed as a precaution. 17 worlds. Billions of souls, most of them probably innocent, all of them marked for death because my warning had taught the Imperium that trust was suicide. I'd intended to save humanity by making it more paranoid, more willing to destroy its own. It seemed I'd succeeded beyond my darkest expectations. There's something else, the apothecary said, his voice careful. The Inquisitor believes the Tyranids deliberately let you broadcast, that they knew you were transmitting and allowed it because, well, they wanted us to know, wanted us to understand what they're capable of, how deeply they've infiltrated, how impossible perfect security has become. Why would they do that? The Inquisitor has a theory. She thinks they're trying to destabilize us psychologically. If we can't trust our own worlds, if every act of Imperial governance becomes suspect, if we start destroying loyal systems out of paranoia, we do their work for them. We become agents of our own consumption. It was brilliant, horrifying but brilliant. The Tyranids had weaponized our warning against us, transformed my act of heroic sacrifice into a vector for systemic paranoia. They'd learned that destroying human civilization didn't require consuming every human, just consuming enough to make the survivors destroy themselves through fear and suspicion. When can I return to my chapter? The apothecary's expression grew pained. Captain, your chapter has been informed of your survival, but they've declined to request your return. The master of your company believes that anyone who has been that deeply processed by the swarm, no matter how much of their body was recovered, cannot be fully trusted. There's concern about genetic infiltration, behavioral conditioning, even psychic corruption. You're not formally excommunicated, but I was dead to my brothers. They'd received my gene seed, mourned my loss, and moved on. The thing that wore Caster Valorian's face and memories was too uncertain, too compromised, too obviously a potential threat to ever be welcomed back to the ranks of the Crimson Praetors. I'd survived, but Caster Valorian hadn't. The Death Watch has offered you a place, the apothecary continued. Your experience makes you invaluable against the Tyranid threat. You understand them in ways no other Imperial warrior does. You've touched the hive mind and lived. Such knowledge shouldn't be wasted. I wanted to refuse. The Death Watch was an honorable service, but it was also an exile, a place for space marines who couldn't or wouldn't return to their chapters. Joining them would mean accepting that I truly had died on Kryptos, that this augmetic reconstruction was a different person wearing my memories like a suit of armor. But what choice did I have? I'd been consumed, digested, rebuilt from fragments. The man I'd been had made a choice to sacrifice everything in hopes of saving others. This new creation that shared his memories couldn't unmake that choice, couldn't reclaim a life that had been legitimately surrendered. "I accept," I said. "That was 40 years ago. Since then, I've fought the Tyranids across a dozen sectors, led kill teams against splinter fleets and infiltrated hive ships, even returned to Cryptus's glassed remains to ensure no genetic material survived. I've become one of the Imperium's foremost experts on the swarm, my experiences and insights shaping tactical doctrine across the Eastern Fringe. And with each battle, I understand them better, too well. I see now what the hive mind saw in those final moments of my consumption, not prey or resource, but something closer to kin. We are both singular consciousnesses created from many parts, both sustained by the sacrifice of individuals to the collective, both willing to make any sacrifice in service to survival. The Imperium devours its own citizens as surely as the Tyranids do, just more slowly and with prettier names. We call it tithe and duty instead of biomass and digestion, but the mathematics are the same. Individual lives matter only as fuel for something larger. The thought should horrify me. Some days, it does. Other days, I wonder if the Emperor, sitting on his golden throne, consuming 1,000 psychers daily to maintain the Astronomicon, understands the Tyranids better than any of us. Perhaps that's why he remains silent, because acknowledging the similarity would break whatever remains of Imperial faith. I dictate these thoughts knowing their heresy, knowing that if the Inquisition reads them, I'll face interrogation and likely execution. But I'm beyond caring about such things. I died on Cryptus. What walks in my place is something between human and post-human, transhuman and transhuman, a bridge between the Imperium and the swarm, whether I want to be or not. The question that haunts me isn't whether we can defeat the Tyranids. We can't. Not completely. They're too vast, too patient, too willing to spend millions of years adapting while we burn through our resources, maintaining an empire that grows more dysfunctional with each passing century. The best we can hope for is stalemate, to make ourselves expensive enough that the swarm seeks easier prey elsewhere in the universe. No, the question that truly haunts me is this. What happens when we finally acknowledge what we've become in the process of fighting them? Every world we destroy on suspicion, every population we purge for contamination, every time we sacrifice billions to save trillions, every choice we make that values survival over humanity. We're teaching ourselves to think like the swarm, to make the same cold calculations, to accept that individual lives are just currency in a larger transaction. We're becoming what we fight, not in body. We're far too attached to our individual forms for that. But in spirit, in philosophy, in the fundamental logic that governs our civilization, the Imperium has been dying for 10,000 years, but the Tyranids are teaching us how to die efficiently, how to process our own populations into resources that might buy another century of existence. Some of my Death Watch brothers think I've been compromised, that my time in the swarm's digestion pools infected me with some subtle corruption that makes me sympathetic to the Xenos. They're wrong, but not in the way they think. The corruption wasn't biological or psychic, it was philosophical. I saw how the swarm views existence and I can't unsee it. I can't return to the simple faith that the Emperor protects, that humanity has a manifest destiny among the stars, that our suffering has cosmic purpose. The Emperor protects, but what does he protect us from, and what does he protect us for? I've seen entire sectors consumed. I've watched hive fleets devour civilizations that had endured for millennia. I've felt the hive mind's patient hunger as it picks apart the strategies we use to resist it. And through it all, I've wondered, are we really fighting for survival or just delaying inevitable adaptation? There's a moment in every Tyranid invasion, usually near the end, when all hope is lost, when the defenders stop seeing the swarm as an alien threat and start seeing it as an inevitability. The psychologists call it invasion fatigue. The preachers call it faithlessness. I call it clarity. Because in that moment, when you're standing on a world that's 3 days from complete consumption, when the sky is black with spore clouds and the ground writhes with rippers, and you know, truly know, that everyone you're protecting will be dead within the week, you understand something fundamental about existence in the 41st millennium. We're all being consumed. The Tyranids are just honest about it. The Imperium consumes its citizens through endless war, crushing labor, systematic indoctrination. Chaos consumes through corruption and madness. The Necrons consume through ancient hatred and the annihilation of all life. Even the Tau, with their naive faith in the greater good, consume individuality in service to collective purpose. There is no escape. There is no salvation. There is only the choice of how you're consumed and what consumes you. I'm writing this account from the observation deck of the Eternal Vigil. Yes, the same ship that was taken at Cryptus. The Mechanicus recovered it, purged its biological contamination, and rebuilt it as a monument to adaptive warfare. I requested it specifically as my command vessel, a reminder of where I died and what I learned. Tomorrow, we deploy to Octarius, where a massive Tyranid fleet and an equally massive Orc War have been locked in combat for decades. The Imperium's strategy, encourage the Xenos to consume each other, is working better than anticipated. The swarm is learning from the Orcs, incorporating their durability and aggression, while the Orcs are growing stronger from the endless combat. Eventually, whichever side wins will emerge as a threat greater than either faction alone. It's the kind of short-term tactical thinking that will doom us in the end. But that's not why I'm going to Octarius. I'm going because 40 years after my consumption, I finally accepted what I am. Not a survivor, but a bridge. Something that exists between the certainty of the Imperium's dying faith and the certainty of the swarm's eternal hunger. I can see both sides clearly now, understand both perspectives, and that understanding is either my greatest weapon or my most terrible corruption. The Inquisitor who oversees my kill team asked me once why I keep fighting if I believe victory is impossible. I told her what I believe now. We fight not because we can win, but because how we face inevitable defeat defines what we were. The Imperium will fall to the Tyranids, to chaos, to its own internal decay, or to all three simultaneously. But the manner of our falling matters. Will we fall as slaves to fear, destroying ourselves in paranoid panic? Will we fall as monsters, becoming indistinguishable from the horrors we fight? Will we fall as blind fanatics, unable to adapt because adaptation requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths? Or will we fall as humans, flawed, finite, frightened, but defiant to the end? The Tyranids taught me that no one survives their invasions. But survival isn't binary. There are ways to persist beyond death, to leave traces that outlast the body, to ensure that what you were matters even after you cease to exist. My brothers on Cryptus died, but their sacrifice warned billions. I died, but something carrying my purpose continues. The Imperium will die, but what it stood for, the idea that humanity deserves to exist, to struggle, to choose its own fate, that might survive in whatever comes after. Or maybe that's just the last illusion of a corrupted mind trying to find meaning in meaningless suffering. Either way, tomorrow I go to Octarius. I'll fight. I'll kill. I'll probably die, truly this time, too shredded for even the Mechanicus to resurrect. And when the swarm consumes me, they'll learn what I learned. That humans are most dangerous not when we're trying to survive, but when we've accepted that survival is impossible and choose to fight anyway. Because that's the one thing the hive mind will never understand, the one advantage we maintain despite all their adaptive brilliance. We know we're going to lose eventually, and we keep fighting anyway. Not because we're stupid or deluded, but because the fight itself, the refusal to surrender, the insistence on agency even in the face of inevitability, is what makes us human. The Tyranids will win. They'll consume the galaxy, digest every civilization, incorporate every useful trait. They'll become everything we were and more, a perfect amalgamation of all biological potential optimized for pure survival. but they'll never know what it felt like to be us. They'll never understand the courage required to face extinction without flinching. They'll never grasp the strange nobility of a species that knew it was doomed, but maintained its principles anyway. And in 10 million years, when the swarm has consumed everything and sits alone in a sterile universe with nothing left to eat, perhaps some distant echo of human defiance will persist in their genetic memory. A ghost in the code, reminding them that once there were beings who chose how they fell. The Emperor protects, the preachers say. Maybe he does. Or maybe he just watches, as we all must watch, while the universe makes its final calculations about which forms of consciousness deserve to persist. Either way, I learned the truth on Kryptos, in the moment between death and dissolution. No one survives a Tyranid invasion. But some of us get to choose how we're consumed, and that choice, futile, defiant, utterly human, is the only victory we'll ever have.